Well, it's an honor for me to participate in this wonderful conference. I'd like to talk about basically the cold climate growing of Vitis vinifera. So my grandfather, Konstantin, was born in Odessa in 1899 and became a professor there and learned many techniques about growing Vitis vinifera in a cold climate. And he brought those techniques to the New World and New York and pioneered the introduction of vinifera in New York. So next slide, please. So as you can see, the Finger Lakes are a series of very deep lakes. And we have vineyards on two of the lakes, Keuka Lake, which is the one shaped like a Y. On the left, you can see a red dot where our vineyards are located. And then we also have vineyards on Seneca Lake, which is just to the right of that. And these lakes are very deep, and they moderate the surrounding temperature along the hillsides, allowing us to grow the more delicate Vitis vinifera. These lakes were carved by glaciers, so that's why they're very deep and they have steep hillsides. Next slide, please. So here you can see a map of different New York wine regions, and then sort of a satellite photo of the lake. So the large lake to the north of the Finger Lakes is Lake Ontario, which also affects the climate in our area. And these very deep glacier lakes don't freeze typically, and so they moderate the temperature, allowing us to grow the more delicate vinifera. And they also affect the climate throughout the growing season. They delay spring frost and fall frost, and this gives us a longer growing season. Next slide, please. So here you can see some of the history of Konstantin. This is a picture of him. He worked at the Trubetskoy winery and vineyards and experimental grape station, and actually developed a plow that would cover the entire vine. So as you know, in the Ukraine, the winters are quite cold. And so he developed this plow that would cover the entire vine. So basically the canes were bent down closer to the ground, and then this plow covered the entire canes, buds. And then in the spring, of course, it was uncovered. And this protected the buds from the very cold winters that you have in the Ukraine. And there's a picture of Konstantin on the bottom right as a young researcher. Next slide, please. So here's another picture of Konstantin showing the mechanical covering of the entire vine. And this is back in Odessa in 1935. Next slide, please. So one of the reasons for Konstantin's success was grafting the vinifera onto resistant rootstock. So here you see a picture of grafting, and on the upper right, this is a completed graft. It's what we would call an omega cut, almost like a jigsaw puzzle. And in the old days, Dr. Frenk did this by hand with a grafting knife, cutting the incisions on both. But nowadays we have machines. So the cut that was done on the upper right was done by a machine, which basically makes like an omega cut, like a jigsaw puzzle. So you have kind of a female and male end, and they click together. But in the old days, it was done with a grafting knife, as Konstantin is showing. And this was very important because phylloxera the root louse that damaged the vineyards of Europe actually originated in the Northeast United States. So Konstantin knew that in order to grow vinifera here in the New World, he had to use the grafting technique and rootstocks that were phylloxera resistant. So basically, these were the native wild grapes of the eastern United States, evolved to be resistant to this native local pest, or they would not have survived in the wild. So this was one of the techniques that Konstantin learned in the Ukraine. He actually helped reestablish vineyards that were damaged by phylloxera using this technique in the Ukraine. And then he brought this technique back with him to the New World to grow the vinifera in the eastern United States. Next slide, please. So some of the techniques that we have learned from Konstantin and which he learned in the Ukraine and that we're now using in the Finger Lakes is what we call delayed pruning. So basically we want to delay the pruning until we can access the winter damage to the buds. So in early spring, late winter, we will go through and we will slice open the buds of, let's say, 100 buds, and then we can extrapolate and see what is the percentage of live buds versus dead buds, and then we can adjust the pruning accordingly. So in other words, if it was a very severe winter, and by severe, our standards would be anything below minus 10 Fahrenheit, we start getting more damage to the bud. So if we saw a higher percentage of bud damage, we would leave an additional cane or two in our pruning to compensate. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, Konstantin did his studies in the Ukraine. He attended the Polytechnic Institute of Odessa, and you can see the title of his thesis was actually very beneficial to his work here in New York. He studied the frost resistance and frost damages and overcoming them with mechanical covering and uncovering of grapes. So this was really necessary to grow vinifera in the Ukraine. The winters there are even harsher than the winters that we have in New York. Next slide, please. So another technique that Konstantin developed was called deep plowing prior to the planting. So this is a very large plow that he used here. And this was to mix up the soil. So we have layers of shale in our vineyards here. And this deep plow, it had to be pulled by a bulldozer, actually ripped through the soil and improved drainage and mixed up the different soil layers and also broke up the shale pan. Next slide, please. So again, after we assess the bud damage, we can leave extra canes during the pruning process. You will see in our slides that we follow what's called VSP, or vertical shoot positioning, with 2 pairs of catch wires. And the goal and the idea is to increase the sun exposure both to the canes and to the fruit. Being in a cool climate, we want to do everything possible to promote more sun exposure, and this results in better quality and a healthier vine. Next slide, please. So one of the important techniques is what we call hilling down. So you'll see a slide later where we hill up in the fall, early winter, but what we need to take the soil away from the graft union to prevent own rooting from the scion or from the vinifera portion. We want the roots only to come from the rootstock itself. And it's important every spring that we take the soil away from the graft union to prevent own rooting. It's also important to have a regular spray schedule of fungicides throughout the growing season. We do have quite a humid climate here with rainfall throughout the growing season, and that necessitates fungicide sprays to protect from powdery mildew, downy mildew, and other fungus diseases. So anything we can do to result in a more healthy vine will increase the winter hardiness of that vine. So throughout the growing season, we want to reduce stress. We don't want to overcrop the vine. We don't want any disease on the vine. We want good sun exposure on the canes, the leaves, the fruit. And all of these things result in a healthier vine, which gives it greater winter hardiness. Next slide, please. We also practice shoot thinning and cluster thinning done in the early summer to keep the crop levels, again, at a moderate size. So for us, moderate crop would be a target of about 3.5 tons per acre. And this results both in better quality and, again, less weakening of the vine, giving it more resistance to winter damage. Next slide, please. So we practice both hand harvesting and machine harvesting. And of course, quality is very important at harvest to get the optimum flavors, sugar, acid, pH level. But we don't want to delay the harvest unnecessarily. Once we reach those numbers and ideal flavors, we want to harvest the grapes. Delaying the harvest unnecessarily adds to a stress on the vine and weakens the vines and increases the chance of winter injury. So the timing of harvest really is important, both from a quality standpoint and also from a vine health standpoint. Next slide, please. So here we go back to the hilling up. So this is a very important. You saw photos earlier in the Ukraine where Konstantin actually hilled up the entire vine. The canes were laid down. In our case, our winters are not as cold as the Ukraine, so we don't need to bury the entire vine, just about a foot of soil over the graft union. And this also protects basal buds. So we have a single bottom plow that's on offset on a toolbar. So basically the plowshare is very close to the vine and throws a mound up against the vine about a foot high. And we would go on both sides of the vine, and this makes a nice mound. And then this soil acts as a blanket and protects the graft union and some basal buds. And again, winter is our Achilles heel. So anything we can do to protect the vine, increase the health of the vine, gives us greater winter hardiness. And this is a technique now that Konstantin started and is practiced throughout the Finger Lakes. It's sort of our insurance policy. In the event of a catastrophic winter, and if there was trunk damage, cane damage, the vine would be saved because we could bring up new shoots from the basal buds and retrain the vine, and thus avoid having to replant the vine. We might lose a year's production, but that's much better than having the vine killed by the winter. Next slide, please. So our climate here in the Finger Lakes is very similar to Northern Europe. So the varieties from Northern Europe, Riesling is our number one. Again, the climate is similar to Germany. where Riesling originated, and other Northern European varieties, particularly aromatic whites, do very well here. Austrian grapes like Gruner Veltliner, Blaufränkisch, Alsatian grapes like Gewürztraminer, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay is also does very well here. And we also have great success with sparkling wines, méthode champenoise or traditional method. Our climate is similar to the Champagne region of France. And so the quality of our sparkling wines is a very high level. So you can see from some of our accolades that although California dominates the U.S. Domestic scene as far as wine production, many wine experts believe that the Finger Lakes of New York are actually better suited for the cooler climate varieties that originated in Northern Europe. And sort of proof of the pudding, you can see some of the awards. Wine and Spirits announces their top 100 wineries of the year, and we were judged top 100 in the world by this prestigious publication. We won Winery of the Year within New York State. Hugh Johnson's Pocket Wine Book gave us their highest rating, 4 stars. And we're the only New York winery to have this 4-star rating continuously for many years. And USA Today, one of the most popular newspapers in America, listed us as one of their top 10 best tasting rooms. So we really are proud of the legacy of Konstantin, and we're now in our 4th generation of the family, continuing his work here, which all started in Odessa. So again, it's really wonderful to be part of this conference and share some of the techniques that Konstantin learned in Odessa and then brought with him to the New World. And now I'm sharing them back with you in Odessa. So thank you very much for having me. It's really been an honor. Yes.
I want to invite you to Odessa with our governor, Mr. Grinevetsky, and our mayor, Mr. Trukhanov, to Odessa. We wait for you very, very, very much, and we will be glad to see you in Odessa, and we have very interesting excursion, and you can see your house of Konstantin Frenk. We know where is it. We wait for you in Odessa once more.
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation. We're still struggling with the COVID here, and hopefully soon things will come back to normal. I do still have relatives living in Odessa, and I've had relatives here in the U.S. Visit Odessa, and I know it's a very beautiful city.
Thank you, Frederick. We are really glad to hear you, to see you, that you give your time, give your attention, and give some presentation of your vineyards. We know that it's early time in the morning. It's around 7 o'clock, yes?
Yes.
In US, but we are glad that you take your time and made presentation for us. My name is Yulia, and I'm introduced from Tairov Institute of Viticulture and Winemaking, and it's honor to hear you, and it's honor to visit vineyards in Finger Lakes, because in 2007 I had a Fulbright practice in Cornell University and worked with Professor Justin van Heuvel. She showed me a lot of vineyards in Finger Lakes, and it was really good practice and really good options for Ukrainian viticulturists and winemakers. And we hope with our Odessa universities, with our food academy, that you really will have possibility to come to Ukraine, to visit our city, to visit our vineyards, and maybe in future have some cooperation in research or in viticulture in general. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. We actually have several varieties here that are grown in your region, such as Arkatsateli and Saparavi. And they are gaining more interest in our region, and more Americans are learning to enjoy these varieties. So it's great to have this collaboration.
So we are open for our cooperation, and we are really waiting for your coming to Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you.